January 1944. The bitter wind cuts across the plains of Alabama. Snow is rare here, but the chill of winter seems to seep into the very wooden barracks of Camp Aliceville. Inside, German prisoners of war shuffle through the mess hall, weary from long days of labor, their uniforms still bearing the dust of distant battlefields. And then, something strange happens. A whistle blows. The line of soldiers pauses, eyes widening. From the kitchen emerges a scoop of ice cream, creamy and cold, placed into waiting bowls. Laughter bubbles among the prisoners. "Is this real?" whispers one, a former corporal from the Afrika Korps, his hands trembling. Moments later, a guard hands out glass bottles of Coca-Cola. The dark, fizzy liquid hisses as it meets the glass, cold condensation forming on trembling hands. Soldiers sip, incredulous. Sweet. Carbonated. Alive. For a moment, the war feels distant, replaced by a surreal taste of normal life. It is a small comfort. Yet, in these fleeting moments, history twists. Men who once faced each other across battlefields now share astonishment at ice cream and Coca-Cola in an American prison camp. The war rages on outside, but inside, disbelief tastes like vanilla and cola. By 1942, the world had plunged into a conflict unlike any in human memory. Europe, North Africa, and the Pacific were engulfed in war. Nazi Germany, having conquered much of continental Europe, had pushed its mechanized armies deep into the Soviet Union and North Africa. Across the Atlantic, the United States had entered the war following the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, mobilizing a nation still recovering from the Great Depression. American industry transformed overnight. Factories churned out tanks, aircraft, and weapons at an unprecedented pace. German soldiers captured on distant battlefields became prisoners of war. In North Africa, after the crushing defeat at El Alamein in late 1942, tens of thousands of Axis troops, primarily Germans and Italians, were taken by the Allies. The U.S., alongside British forces, faced the logistical challenge of housing these prisoners securely. Many were sent to ports in North Africa and shipped across the Atlantic to American soil, far from the battlefront, to prevent escape or rescue. By early 1943, the U.S. had established a network of POW camps in remote areas of the country: Alabama, Arizona, Texas, and even as far north as Minnesota. These camps were meticulously organized, often modeled on military bases. Guards were trained, regulations followed, and the Geneva Convention provided the framework. Prisoners were to be treated humanely, given sufficient food, shelter, medical care, and the right to work or engage in recreational activities. First, German officers and enlisted men were suspicious. American propaganda had portrayed them as ruthless invaders. Now they found themselves in orderly camps, where the harshest punishment was often a restriction on recreational privileges. Letters sent home described the paradox of captivity in a country so different from the war-torn Europe they had left behind. Soldiers marveled at the vastness of the U.S., the open plains, and the well-stocked mess halls, though few expected the surprises that awaited them, like ice cream and Coca-Cola. Meanwhile, back in Europe, the war pressed on. Battles raged from the Russian steppes to the beaches of Normandy. But thousands of German soldiers were removed from the front lines, held in a country untouched by bombing, fire, or occupation. For these men, America was a strange land of abundance and order, a stark contrast to the destruction they had witnessed. The transportation of POWs was itself a logistical feat: ships crossing the Atlantic, navigated waters patrolled by German U-boats, a deadly gamble for both soldiers and crew. Once on American soil, the prisoners were assigned to camps according to rank and nationality. Officers often received separate facilities from enlisted men, a practice respecting the Geneva Convention. Daily life was structured yet repetitive: roll calls, work details, and occasional supervised recreation. Yet the most surprising aspects were not in the regulations or the architecture. They were in the small, human details: the taste of rich American chocolate, the warmth of heated barracks in winter, and the sheer novelty of seeing soldiers of their own nation served ice cream and soda. These comforts, trivial by some measures, would leave a lasting impression on men who had seen the extremes of hunger, fear, and battle. The paradox of war was clear. Here were men trained to kill, disciplined in the art of warfare, now confronted with a humanity so unfamiliar it bewildered them. And yet, these experiences would shape their memories of America in ways no battle report could. It is into this world of global conflict, logistical triumphs, and human contradictions that the story of ice cream, Coca-Cola, and astonished German POWs begins. Across the United States, POW camps became small, isolated worlds. Some were set in the swamplands of Alabama, others in the deserts of Arizona, or the rolling plains of Texas. Each camp was a microcosm of military organization, barracks lined in orderly rows, watchtowers at each corner, and fences topped with barbed wire. Guards patrolled day and night, rifles slung over shoulders, yet the atmosphere was often less oppressive than the prisoners had expected. Daily life was rigidly structured. German POWs were woken early for roll calls, followed by assigned work details. Many were sent to farm labor, helping alleviate the domestic labor shortages caused by millions of American men fighting overseas. Others were employed in maintenance, kitchens, or construction within the camps. The work was supervised, but it was also purposeful, designed to keep prisoners occupied and morale stable. Noncompliance was rare. Escape was difficult and dangerous, particularly in remote areas far from the Canadian or Mexican borders. Meals were plentiful compared to wartime Europe. American kitchens provided 3 meals a day, often including fresh bread, meat, vegetables, and dairy products. For many prisoners, it was the first time they had experienced consistent nutrition since leaving home. Ice cream, chocolate, and Coca-Cola were rare treats, sometimes reserved for special occasions. Yet their impact was profound. A scoop of vanilla or chocolate could evoke astonishment. A bottle of fizzy Coca-Cola seemed almost magical. Guards watched amusedly as men who had survived desert battles or European winters marveled at simple luxuries. Recreation was another carefully managed element. Sports became a bridge between cultures. Baseball games, soccer matches, and improvised gym activities provided exercise, camaraderie, and a semblance of normalcy. Libraries were established, and prisoners were encouraged to read, write letters, or pursue hobbies like woodworking or music. Concerts were sometimes held, with orchestras of fellow prisoners performing familiar German compositions. For the first time in years, soldiers found themselves in a space where war existed only in memory. Communication with the outside world was controlled but possible. POWs were allowed to send letters to their families in Germany, reporting on conditions that were far better than those feared by loved ones back home. Many letters mention meals, recreational activities, and the surprising generosity of the American guards. Some even included small sketches or descriptions of camp life, noting the novelty of ice cream and soda. These accounts, later collected in memoirs, painted a picture of a war experience almost unimaginable to those still in Europe. The camps were also centers of cultural exchange. Guards often spoke with prisoners, learning bits of German, while prisoners learned American customs and language. Festive events were sometimes held on holidays, and prisoners could participate in supervised activities that reinforced mutual respect. Even so, discipline remained strict. Any infraction could result in solitary confinement or restricted privileges. Yet within these boundaries, prisoners discovered freedoms that contrasted sharply with the violence they had witnessed on the front lines. Work details were another technological and tactical consideration. Prisoners were employed on farms, in factories, and on camp maintenance projects, providing labor essential to the war effort while keeping prisoners engaged. By contributing to the production of food, construction, or goods, POWs gained a sense of purpose, yet their labor also had strategic value. Camps were carefully designed to balance work requirements with recreation, ensuring that prisoners remained physically active and mentally occupied without compromising security. The moral dimension was equally deliberate. The United States, aware of its image on the global stage, adhered strictly to the Geneva Convention of 1929. Treating prisoners humanely was not merely an ethical choice, but a political one. Reports of mistreatment could be exploited by Axis propaganda, undermining American credibility. By providing adequate food, medical care, and recreational facilities, the U.S. demonstrated a commitment to international law and humane principles. Ice cream, baseball, and Coca-Cola became symbols of this moral positioning. tangible evidence that America upheld standards of decency even toward enemy soldiers. Leadership within the camps was crucial. Officers and non-commissioned guards were trained to manage both security and morale. Camp commanders balanced strict enforcement of regulations with encouragement of recreational activities and cultural engagement. Some camps even established advisory councils composed of prisoners, allowing them limited input into daily routines and fostering a sense of agency. This leadership approach reduced tension, maintained order, and created an environment in which POWs could adapt to captivity without hostility. Propaganda and perception were also intertwined with tactical and moral considerations. American officials understood that letters sent home by POWs would carry impressions of their treatment abroad. Prisoners often described not only the adequacy of food and shelter, but the small luxuries. Ice cream on warm days, Coca-Cola bottles handed out after work details, baseball games, or concerts. These stories, once shared in Germany, challenged narratives of American brutality and contributed to a broader understanding of U.S. values, even among the enemy. The integration of technology and morality extended to health and sanitation. Camp hospitals were well-equipped, and preventive measures against disease were rigorous. Medical staff, including both American and German personnel, ensured that injuries, illnesses, and malnutrition were addressed promptly. This investment in prisoner health was both ethical and strategic. A healthier population of POWs reduced the likelihood of unrest, minimized deaths that could spark international controversy, and preserved the potential labor contribution of prisoners. Additionally, cultural sensitivity was a subtle but significant component of camp management. Leaders recognized that maintaining familiar routines, food preferences, and recreational activities would stabilize prisoner behavior. Soccer matches, classical music concerts, and German-language newspapers were incorporated into daily life. By respecting cultural identity, camps fostered cooperation and minimized conflict, further reinforcing the effectiveness of American leadership strategies. The technological achievements of American camp management, refrigeration, industrial kitchens, logistics, and labor coordination, combined seamlessly with tactical and moral imperatives. Together, they created a controlled environment in which POWs experienced both security and comfort. Ice cream and Coca-Cola were not merely indulgences. They were the visible manifestation of a sophisticated approach to wartime prisoner management that balanced practicality, legality, and humanity. The intersection of these factors, tactical foresight, technological capability, ethical responsibility, and cultural sensitivity, offers insight into why German POWs were able to experience moments of disbelief and joy amidst captivity. What may seem trivial on the surface was underpinned by deliberate, methodical planning. Every scoop of ice cream, every fizzy sip of Coca-Cola reflected a system designed to maintain order, uphold American principles, and influence perceptions across oceans. In this angle, we see how human experience, military strategy, and moral responsibility intertwined. The astonishment of German POWs was not accidental. It was the product of careful design, planning, and leadership. And it is precisely this convergence that leads to the next chapter of the story. The climactic moments when prisoners' disbelief reached its peak, and small luxuries became profound markers of the American approach to war, captivity, and humanity. Spring of 1944. Camp Papago Park, Arizona. The desert sun beats down on low, dusty barracks, yet inside, anticipation hangs in the air. A rumor spreads among the prisoners. Today, ice cream will be served in the mess hall. For men who had spent months on battlefields racked by hunger and frost, the idea seems absurd. Some laugh nervously, others look around, unsure if they are being tested or mocked. The kitchen doors swing open. Guards carry trays, each holding a generous scoop of creamy vanilla ice cream. The prisoners hesitate. Hands tremble as they reach forward. The first taste evokes gasps of astonishment. Sweet, cold, and unexpectedly rich, the ice cream is unlike anything they have eaten in years. Lieutenant Carl Fischer, a former infantry officer from Normandy, later recalled, "It was surreal. I had faced machine gun fire in France, yet this small pleasure, felt almost more shocking than any battlefield." The moment is amplified when Coca-Cola follows. Glass bottles are handed out, the dark liquid hissing as it meets the air. Soldiers watch in disbelief as bubbles rise and foam spills over the rim. A corporal from the Afrika Korps laughed aloud. We had only dreamed of sugar and soda. Now it flows freely. The sound of laughter echoes across the mess hall, mingling with the clatter of trays and the fizz of carbonated drinks. For many, these moments mark a turning point in their perception of captivity. Prior to arrival in the United States, German soldiers had been conditioned to expect cruelty or harsh punishment. Instead, they are met with human kindness, discipline tempered by indulgence, and unexpected abundance. Ice cream and Coca-Cola become symbols, not just of comfort, but of the dissonance between expectation and reality. Other camps produced similarly striking moments. In Camp Aliceville, Alabama, prisoners organized an impromptu baseball game on a crisp winter morning. Guards watched as soldiers, once hardened by combat, played with enthusiasm and competitive spirit, often forgetting the barbed wire fencing that enclosed them. At the end of the game, a tray of ice cream was served as a prize. The sight of uniformed men, once enemies in faraway battlefields, laughing over cones of frozen dessert, created a tableau almost too surreal to believe. Music amplified the climax of these experiences. Some camps allowed prisoners to form orchestras or choirs, performing familiar German compositions. In one Arizona camp, a performance of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony coincided with a distribution of soda and dessert. Prisoners recalled later that the juxtaposition of artillery echoes in memory and the soft strains of music combined with creamy ice cream created a sensation of disbelief and awe. It was as if the war itself had been momentarily suspended. Letters sent home provide a vivid record. One corporal wrote, "I cannot describe it properly. Ice cream in the afternoon sun, Coca-Cola in the evening, a baseball game on a Sunday. We were prisoners, yet these moments made us feel alive in a way the front never allowed." These were not mere anecdotes. They became part of the prisoner's psychological recovery, reinforcing morale and a sense of personal dignity. The peak experiences were not confined to food or recreation. Even the smallest gestures, a guard offering advice on baseball, a shared joke over coffee, a simple smile, had outsized impact. German soldiers were learning to navigate a world governed by both order and generosity, where human interaction could be simultaneously disciplined and empathetic. These moments were rare in wartime Europe, where survival often depended on suspicion, ruthlessness, and constant vigilance. The contrast between American camps and the European front could not have been starker. Prisoners who had endured freezing winters in Russia or shelling in Normandy now walked in clean barracks, received steady meals, and were offered small pleasures as part of daily life. Ice cream and Coca-Cola became metaphors for this contrast, symbols of a captivity that was humane, structured, and even indulgent, juxtaposed against the chaos, deprivation, and violence of battlefields they had left behind. Psychologists and historians alike note that these peak experiences had lasting effects. Positive reinforcement, combined with structure and small luxuries, created psychological resilience. Men learned to adapt, to find comfort in routines, and to appreciate small joys, skills that would carry them through the remaining months of war and even influence post-war perceptions. For some, the taste of ice cream or soda became intertwined with memories of survival, camaraderie, and human decency. Enduring long after the war had ended, by the end of 1944, the pattern was clear. Wherever POW camps were well organized and provisions carefully managed, German prisoners experienced not only the security of structured life, but also moments of wonder that seemed almost impossible amidst the global conflict. Ice cream and Coca-Cola were more than treats. They were markers of the extraordinary human dimension of war, a turning point where disbelief and gratitude converged in shared, unforgettable experiences. And yet, these moments of peak astonishment would ripple beyond the camps themselves, influencing letters, memoirs, and international perception, leading into the broader implications for culture, diplomacy, and post-war reconciliation. The astonishment of German POWs extended far beyond the immediate pleasure of ice cream and Coca-Cola. Letters sent home, often carefully censored but filled with genuine awe, carried the stories of abundance, kindness, and structured camp life back to a Europe consumed by deprivation. Families in Germany, struggling under rationing, bombed cities, and the constant threat of Allied forces, could scarcely believe the accounts. Prisoners living in safety, playing baseball, and enjoying desserts that were scarce or unavailable in their homeland. One recurring theme emerges from these reports: a reevaluation of the enemy. Soldiers who had once fought with ruthless determination began to see Americans not solely as faceless adversaries, but as human beings capable of generosity, fairness, and empathy. Lieutenant Fisher, reflecting decades later in a memoir, wrote, "It was impossible not to rethink what we had been told about the Americans. They fed us, laughed with us, and even in our captivity, treated us with dignity. It shook the black and white vision of war we had carried with us." The wider implications were as much psychological as they were diplomatic. Within the camps, humane treatment reinforced discipline and reduced unrest, but it also created a narrative that could be leveraged after the war. The U.S. government was aware of the propaganda potential. Prisoners who returned home would share experiences of humane captivity, undermining Nazi claims of American cruelty. These human stories, particularly of the surreal indulgence in ice cream and Coca-Cola, became emblematic of a broader American approach, combining military might with moral authority. Morale within the camps was profoundly affected. Men who had faced relentless hardship now found themselves in environments where structured work, recreation, and occasional indulgences were the norm. Sports, music, and cultural activities offered not only diversion, but a sense of agency and engagement. Soldiers who had previously been passive or despondent became participants in camp life, organizing events, maintaining traditions, and even assuming informal leadership roles. These experiences fostered self-respect, cooperation, and resilience, a stark contrast to the chaos and violence they had left behind. The novelty of American products, Coca-Cola, ice cream, and other treats, also had symbolic weight. These small indulgences represented the abundance and technological advancement of the United States, a nation untouched by the immediate destruction of war on its own soil. For German POWs, this abundance was both a practical and psychological shock, revealing a lifestyle that had seemed unattainable. The simple act of sipping a fizzy beverage or savoring a cold dessert became a moment of astonishment that transcended mere taste. It was a tangible reminder of another world, one where order, comfort, and civility could coexist with global conflict. These peak experiences extended into cultural diplomacy. Prisoners observed American holidays, traditions, and entertainment, often for the first time. Barbecue gatherings, movie nights, and seasonal celebrations allowed POWs to witness an alternate society in action. Music concerts, particularly performances of classical German compositions, became shared experiences that bridged cultural divides. In these moments, the barriers of nationality, rank, and wartime enmity softened, replaced by recognition of common humanity. The broader psychological effect was also evident in post-war reflections. Many former POWs returned home with stories that challenged the narratives of hatred and fear propagated by the Nazi regime. They recounted moments of kindness, fairness, and indulgence, illustrating that even in captivity, dignity and human decency could prevail. Ice cream and Coca-Cola, trivial as they may seem, became symbols of this revelation, recurring in memoirs, interviews, and historical accounts. These recollections contributed to the gradual reshaping of perceptions between former enemies, planting the seeds for reconciliation and mutual understanding. Technological and logistical lessons from the camps also had lasting implications. The ability to supply and manage thousands of prisoners efficiently, while maintaining morale and adhering to international law, informed future military practices. American officers who oversaw these operations understood that humane treatment could coexist with strict discipline and security. The balance achieved in these camps became a model for prisoner management in later conflicts, demonstrating that military necessity and ethical responsibility were not mutually exclusive. By late 1944 and into 1945, the cumulative effect of these experiences was unmistakable. German POWs carried memories of structured, humane captivity back to Europe, memories punctuated by baseball games, orchestras, and the surreal pleasure of ice cream and Coca-Cola. These experiences reshaped individual attitudes, influenced familial perceptions, and even contributed to broader post-war narratives. They highlighted a critical truth: the human dimension of warfare. The moments of wonder, astonishment, and kindness can leave as deep an impression as the battles themselves. In this convergence of psychology, culture, and morality, the story of German POWs reaches its climax. The small joys and comforts of American camps, once unimaginable, became defining experiences that challenged preconceptions, fostered resilience, and left a lasting imprint on memory and history. It is from this apex that the narrative moves naturally into the aftermath, exploring the consequences for the prisoners, the camps, and the broader post-war world. May 1945. In Germany, cities lay in ruins, factories were silent, and millions of civilians struggled to survive. Across the Atlantic, thousands of German prisoners remained in American camps, many of them bewildered by the abrupt end of hostilities. Victory in Europe had been declared, but for prisoners, freedom was still carefully managed. Repatriation would not be immediate. Transportation logistics, security concerns, and agreements with allied nations dictated a measured release process. For many POWs, the immediate aftermath of the war was a mixture of relief, uncertainty, and reflection. Soldiers who had endured months or years of battle now confronted the incongruity of safe captivity in the United States. The memories of ice cream, Coca-Cola, baseball games, and music concerts contrasted starkly with the devastation of Europe. Men who had anticipated hardship and punishment were instead returning home with tales of unexpected comfort and humane treatment. Camps became temporary zones of reintegration. Prisoners continued work details and recreational activities, but now with a heightened sense of anticipation for repatriation. Medical care remained thorough, addressing lingering illnesses or injuries sustained during prior campaigns. Psychologists and military officers observed a marked difference in morale compared to prisoners in less well-managed facilities elsewhere. Letters and interviews from this period suggest that POWs often felt gratitude alongside apprehension, grateful for their treatment, uncertain about the reception awaiting them in post-war Germany. The immediate consequences of humane captivity were also practical. Soldiers returning home were healthier, better nourished, and psychologically more stable than counterparts who had endured harsh imprisonment elsewhere. Camps had minimized exposure to disease and malnutrition, maintained physical activity through labor and sports, and fostered a sense of structure that helped ease the transition back into civilian life. These outcomes had long-term implications for reintegration, as former POWs were better equipped to cope with post-war challenges. Personal narratives highlight the deep impressions left by small comforts. Corporal Hans Muller, who had scooped his first ice cream at Camp Aliceville, later recalled, "I returned to a Europe in ruins, yet the memory of those small pleasures carried me. They reminded me that people could still show decency, even amid destruction." For countless others, Coca-Cola and baseball games became symbols of an unexpected humanity that counterbalanced the horrors they had witnessed. Letters sent home during this period also reveal a subtle shift in perception. Families read not of brutality, but of courtesy, nourishment, and structured routines. Prisoners described interactions with guards, shared jokes, and the novelty of American products. These stories quietly challenged wartime propaganda and provided a humanizing lens on a country previously cast as the enemy. The psychological impact was profound, shaping memories and influencing post-war narratives of reconciliation. Camps themselves began to downsize gradually. As transportation became available, prisoners were assigned to ships and trains bound for Europe. Repatriation was orderly, reflecting the meticulous planning that had characterized their captivity. Officers and enlisted men alike were briefed, processed, and released according to rank and logistical priorities. Even in these final steps, the structured efficiency of the American system ensured that the transition from captivity to freedom remained secure, humane, and predictable. In sum, the immediate consequences of POW life in the United States extended beyond safety and nutrition. They encompassed physical health, psychological stability, and cultural exposure that contrasted sharply with the conditions in Germany and the battlefields of Europe. Ice cream, Coca-Cola and recreational activities were not mere novelties. They were integral to a strategy that fostered compliance, morale, and long-lasting memories of humane treatment. The long-term effects of captivity in American POW camps extended far beyond individual memories. For German soldiers returning to a shattered Europe, their experiences in the United States provided a striking contrast to the devastation, hunger, and chaos they found at home. Many carried stories of humane treatment, recreational activities, and unexpected indulgences, ice cream, Coca-Cola, and baseball, back to families and communities struggling to survive. These recollections challenged wartime narratives and reshaped perceptions of the United States. Memoirs and oral histories reveal that former POWs frequently emphasized the psychological impact of their captivity. Soldiers noted how structured routines, recreational opportunities, and small comforts helped them retain a sense of dignity and self-respect. For men who had endured years of fear and deprivation, these experiences offered a measure of emotional recovery, equipping them to face post-war challenges with resilience. Historians argue that such experiences contributed to the smoother reintegration of POWs into civilian life compared with counterparts who had suffered harsher imprisonment. Cultural and diplomatic repercussions were also significant. Letters, memoirs, and reports from returning prisoners became informal channels of communication that humanized the former enemy. German families who read these accounts often expressed surprise, if not disbelief, at the level of care and civility provided by American authorities. The humane treatment of POWs subtly undermined Nazi propaganda that had portrayed the Allies as merciless adversaries. In the broader context of post-war reconstruction, these personal narratives helped pave the way for reconciliation and improved U.S.-Germany relations. The camps themselves left a legacy in military and legal practices. The successful integration of tactical discipline, logistical efficiency, and moral responsibility in American POW management became a reference point for future conflicts. Officers and administrators observed that humane treatment, coupled with structure and security, produced disciplined, cooperative prisoners, a principle that influenced later international approaches to detention and prisoner-of-war protocols. The experience demonstrated that military necessity and ethical responsibility could coexist effectively. Technological innovations also had lasting impact. The infrastructure built to supply and maintain thousands of prisoners, refrigeration for perishable foods, industrial kitchens, and organized labor programs, served as a model for large-scale logistical operations. The management of American POW camps illustrated how complex operations could be executed while preserving human dignity, and these lessons informed both military planning and humanitarian frameworks in subsequent decades. Socially, the memory of ice cream, Coca-Cola, and recreational activities became symbolic markers of captivity and cultural exchange. These details, small yet striking, endured in personal recollections and historical narratives, illustrating how seemingly trivial experiences could leave profound impressions. Former POWs often spoke of them not merely as indulgences, but as symbols of decency, normalcy, and unexpected humanity amid the broader catastrophe of war. Even decades later, these experiences resonated. Veterans' reunions, memoirs, and historical studies frequently highlight the astonishment and gratitude of German POWs, underscoring the lasting emotional and cultural impact. Ice cream and Coca-Cola became emblematic of a unique wartime experience, demonstrating that acts of care and civility can ripple outward, influencing perception, memory, and international understanding long after the conflict ends. In sum, the long-term consequences of German POW experiences in the United States encompassed psychological resilience, cultural awareness, diplomatic influence, and a blueprint for humane military management. The combination of sustenance, recreation, and moral integrity created memories that endured, shaping post-war identities and contributing to reconciliation between former enemies. These enduring effects provide a natural bridge to the final chapter of the story, the reflective closure on what these experiences reveal about humanity, war, and the power of small gestures to leave a lasting imprint. History often remembers battles, strategies, and leaders, the sweeping movements of armies across continents. Yet sometimes, it is the smallest, most human details that linger longest in memory. 4 German POWs in American camps. Ice cream and Coca-Cola were more than treats. They were symbols of a profound paradox, that compassion, generosity, and order could coexist with the vast machinery of war, in the quiet moments of a mess hall, a baseball field, or a concert hall. Soldiers who had faced the extremes of fear and deprivation encountered something unfamiliar. Care without immediate expectation of repayment, joy without victory, civility without threat. These experiences offered psychological relief, a taste of normalcy, and a reminder that even amid global conflict, humanity could endure. They shaped perceptions, fostered resilience, and influenced post-war reconciliation between former enemies. The story of these POWs also reveals the interplay of morality and pragmatism. American military leadership demonstrated that humane treatment was not only ethical but strategically sound. Disciplined, satisfied prisoners were easier to manage, healthier, and less likely to resist. Logistical innovations, cultural sensitivity, and adherence to international law reinforced this approach, proving that organization and empathy need not be mutually exclusive. Perhaps most striking is the enduring legacy of small gestures. A scoop of ice cream, a fizzy sip of Coca-Cola, a baseball game on a sunny afternoon. Moments that might seem trivial carried profound meaning. They bridged cultural divides, softened hostility, and created memories that would outlast the conflict itself. These are reminders that history is not only shaped by decisions in battle rooms or on front lines, but also by human connection, ingenuity, and kindness. As we reflect on these extraordinary experiences, we see that the story of German POWs in American camps is not just about captivity or survival. It is about the persistence of empathy in a world dominated by war. Ice cream and Coca-Cola became more than refreshment. They became enduring symbols of humanity's capacity to surprise, to comfort, and to transform even the bleakest circumstances. In these small, sweet moments, history teaches us a lasting truth. Even in war, human dignity and compassion can leave an indelible mark.